I'm joined here at the BHA's High Holborn headquarters by Nick Rust, Chief Executive. We've just had the reveal of the BHA's review into 6 equine fatalities at this year's Cheltenham Festival. Nick, could you just explain to us a little bit about what today's review was about and what it has recommended?
Well, we looked at the fatalities at Cheltenham and at the festival over the last 3 years, and ahead of the festival meeting this year, we informed Cheltenham that we would need to announce a review if the level of fatalities was above a certain threshold at the festival this year, and sadly we lost 6 horses. So since then we've been working independently to examine all of the factors and the data around the races, not only at this year's festival but at the previous 7 years, and also all other races at Cheltenham, to look at factors to see if we can identify what created the issues this year. We didn't find any specific individual factor behind it, and I think that's probably because over the years a lot of the obvious factors have helped us to have quite a good record on driving down the number of fallers and fatalities in racing, have been the more obvious things like reciting offences and so on. This report has 17 recommendations which are focused more on identifying other risk factors which are usually to do with matters away from the racecourse. In other words, it's about the preparation of the horse and so on. And we announced today that we're going to have a major statistical model that will help us identify risk and take further action to prevent fatalities and fallers over the coming years.
There's a broader context to this as well, which is what you described as the social license that racing has to operate. Can you explain a little bit about what you mean by that? Well,
I think, racing's been a very popular part of our heritage and our history in this country for, nearly 300 years. And particularly, over the last century as, communication methods have improved and so on. And it's intrinsically linked with our culture. 4 of the top 10 sporting events attendances are still with British racing. We still have the second highest spectator sport attendances in the country behind football. It's part of our fabric. But because of that, we can't rest on our laurels, and attitudes, particularly amongst young people, are changing about the use of animals in sport and in other activities in life. And we're seeing through the parliamentary debate that recently happened about whether the BHA should be allowed to continue as an independent regulator on welfare for the sport, we're seeing that mainstream parliamentarians are now challenging our sport. We got a clean bill of health, but in effect, after that debate, we were put on watch to say we want to continue to see some improvement. So mainstream parliamentarians are looking at young people, what they think about animals, and they're reflecting that in their policies. And we need to win them over and make sure that although our record's good, although we're in a position where we can be proud of what's happened, we need to go further and faster to stay ahead of public opinion. And the second thing I would say, Tom, is that those young people who tend to have a slightly different attitude about animals and their usage are also our potential or not future audiences for the sport. So we have to be able to connect with them. If we can't connect with them, then as we've seen, the average age of an owner has already moved from 56 to 59 within the last 10 years. Our demographic is getting older. And if we want to continue to bring money into the sport and to help it thrive, as I believe it deserves to do, then we have to connect with these groups. We can't ignore their views. It doesn't mean some kind of sellout, but it means we have to listen and stay ahead, which means continuing to drive down fatalities.
There'll be some who look at some of these recommendations, particularly safety factor, for example, reduction in the grand annual maximum field size from 24 to 20, and they'll sort of look at that and they'll say that's a slippery slope. You give an inch, you're going to end up giving a yard, and eventually you'll give everything away. What do you say to those critics?
I say take it the other way and ignore risk factors which identify high levels of risk. Put that together with the public opinion around social license. Ignore it and don't take any action, and there's no slippery slope, there'll be a cliff. So, of course, we're conscious in any recommendation that it can be levelled that, oh, crikey, is that somehow giving in? Is that the thin end of a wedge? And so on. What we're saying is, we're not going to be seeing the risk significantly diminishes from 24 to 20 based on the statistics we've got. At some other race courses, we might have to, and have done in the past, reduce safety factors. It's never going to be the case that those reductions are going to go from 20 to 2 runners, you know, but there may be some restrictions of 12, 14, 16 runners at certain races, at racecourses at certain times. Does that completely diminish the spectacle? Yes, I suppose it will for some races, but very few. We will, if we end up amending some of these risk factors, and they're not in all races, they're only in a very few races, you know, that will have some impact, but it's not a major change to the sport, and if it reduces the number of fatalities, then it's worthwhile doing.